What's up, my fellow lore lovers? Welcome back to Loreplay. I'm Dana Pereira, here to ruin another day with another story of horrible human behavior. This time, we're in America. And as a shock to absolutely fucking no one, humans suck here too. And honestly, I'm not sure if it's comforting or absolutely devastating that humans suck in every country. But here we are. Today, we are headed to York County, Pennsylvania. And some of you may know that I'm a Pennsylvania girl. Originally, at least. I mean, I left whenever I was 19, and 25 years later, I still have never looked back. You know, they have that cold white stuff that falls from the sky. I'm just not built for that kind of weather. York, Pennsylvania is exactly the kind of place where a dirt road can transform from cute and charming in the daylight to an absolute mindfuck nightmare in the moonlight. And the thing I love about today's story is that it contains Pennsylvania Dutch folk magic, a reclusive farmer living alone in a hollow, a man convinced he's been hexed, a full moon, rope, kerosene, and a murder so sensational the national press basically got a witch trial boner. Yes, I said witch trial boner. Print it on a t-shirt. Today, we're talking about the Hex Hollow murder. The 1928 killing of Nelson Rehmeyer, a farmer and folk healer in rural Pennsylvania, tied to a belief system called Powwowing, or Braucherei, a Pennsylvania Dutch healing tradition rooted in Christian prayer, spoken charms, Bible verses, and ritual acts passed down through German immigrant communities since the 1700s. And because the universe enjoys irony like it's sipping wine from a skull goblet, this murder happened the night before Thanksgiving. So let's head out to Pennsylvania. Come for the pierogies, stay for the truly unhinged murder story. Before we get into the blood, the fire, and the deeply aggressive vibes of rural 1928, we need to talk about powwowing, because the phrase Pennsylvania powwow witchcraft can make it sound like we're about to discuss a coven of bonneted women hexing a barn while a fiddle plays ominously in the distance. And listen, if that's the vibe, can I come? Sounds fun. Powwowing, or Braucherei, was a folk healing tradition. Not Native American powwow, which is a completely different practice with a completely different history. This was a European-descended Pennsylvania German tradition. Practitioners might be asked to heal burns, stop bleeding, cure warts, protect livestock, treat illness, or remove a curse. It blended Christian prayer, inherited formulas, ritual language, and sometimes physical objects or gestures. It drew from German folk belief and Christian texts, including a very specific book we'll get into in a moment. So think less satanic panic basement ritual and more like your very intense neighbor who knows a prayer for your shingles. Every neighborhood has one. She's usually named Barb or Gretchen. She has one ceramic goose for every season, and she can tell if someone has bad energy just by how they enter a room. Listen, Gretchen and Barb are wise. If they don't like someone, pay heed. Practitioners were called powwowers, powwow doctors, brockers, or sometimes, depending on whether the speaker was being respectful or a dick, hex doctors. In Pennsylvania German folk belief, there was a distinction between Braucherei, healing and blessing, and Hexerei, which was harmful magic. In real life, as with most folk traditions, those categories got messy fast. Like one person's healer is another person's hex gremlin. By 1928, York County was about to become the place where all of those tensions blew up. And the Bible of that system was a little book called The Long Lost Friend. It sounds like a tearjerker to me, like a dog that ran away and then showed up unexpectedly a year later with a bunch of adventures under his belt. But no, that wasn't the book. This book contained healing prayers, protection charms, remedies for illness, ways to stop bleeding, ways to protect livestock, and apparently instructions for attaching a dog to a person, which I don't fully understand, but I guess I respect the specificity of it. To some people, it was a healing manual. To others, it was dangerous. And to a man named John Bleimeyer, it was the thing standing between him and the end of his suffering. John Bleimeyer was not some random drifter who woke up one day and chose chaos. He was born in 1895 into a family of powwowers. His father and grandfather were both practicing healers. He grew up fluent in this tradition. He started practicing himself around age 7. By his early teens, he had a decent reputation as a healer in York County. He also had, from birth, the kind of luck that makes people say, "If I didn't have bad luck, I'd have no luck at all." As a small child, Bleimeyer contracted opnema, a wasting condition in Pennsylvania Dutch belief where a child stops gaining weight and slowly weakens. Today, we'd call it malnutrition. His family, unable to cure him themselves, took 5-year-old John to a neighbor, a large, imposing powwow doctor named Nelson Rehmeyer, who lived about 8 miles away in a hollow in the hills. Rehmeyer took the sick boy down to his basement for half an hour. When they emerged, he gave John's father instructions. Make the boy urinate into a pot before sunrise. Then boil an egg in the urine. I'm telling you this because you need to understand the baseline. John Bleimeyer recovered, probably not because they boiled an egg in piss, but that's neither here nor there. And he would for years think of Nelson Rehmeyer as a family friend. So Bleimeyer grows up. He's a powwow practitioner. He does odd jobs and he has some early success. He once approaches a foaming dog that's terrorizing his coworkers, speaks some words of a charm, and the dog stops foaming and follows him down the street like a puppy. His coworkers were amazed. He has a reputation. Things are looking up. But, gravity. So, shortly after the dog incident, Bleimeyer starts getting sick. He loses his appetite, can't sleep, loses weight, can't work his powwow magic, which, if your entire identity and livelihood are built on that, it's like a carpenter suddenly unable to pick up a hammer. He tries and fails multiple times to cure himself. So, obviously, the only explanation is it must be a hex, right? Absolutely zero other options. In Pennsylvania Dutch belief, a hex cannot be removed until you know who cast it. You can't fight what you can't name. So he consults over 20 different witches over the course of years, spending every penny he has. No one can identify the source. Meanwhile, life keeps tightening the screws. He meets a woman named Lily. They marry. They have 2 children. The first, a son, dies at 5 weeks old. The second, a daughter, dies 3 days after birth. His wife leaves him. He loses job after job, and he becomes suspicious of everyone around him after another powwow practitioner tells him the hex is coming from someone he knows well. What the fuck? Way to stir the small community pot. By 1928, Blymeyer is 33 years old. He is gaunt, broke, and desperate. And he hears about a woman in Marietta, an old woman named Emma Knopp, the River Witch of Marietta. Reportedly in her 90s and with a formidable reputation, he goes to see her over 6 sessions, and dude was paying a hefty price for it. $5 each, which in today's money would be the equivalent of $96. So times that by 6, and your dude is forking out 600 buckarooskies, which for a man who can barely hold a job is quite the investment. I'm all of a sudden more interested in where he got the cash. So at the low price of $600, Emma Knopp gradually identifies the source of Blymeyer's curse. It is Nelson Rehmeyer, the same man who healed him as a child, the family friend, the man his father had trusted enough to hand over his sick 5-year-old and let him go down in the basement with. Blymeyer doesn't believe it, so Knopp shows him. Knopp instructs Blymeyer to place a dollar bill flat on his palm and stare at George Washington's face. Then she pulls the bill away. Now, due to retinal fatigue, when you stare at a high contrast image and then look at a neutral surface, you see an after image. We've all done this before. A floating face appears on his palm. Knopp tells him that is Nelson Rehmeyer. A modern eye calls this a well-documented optical phenomenon being weaponized by a confident old woman. An eye in 1928 rural Pennsylvania calls it confirmation from a witch with a reputation. These are very different eyes. And now Blymeyer is convinced. So what's the fix? The fix is to get a lock of Nelson Rehmeyer's hair and bury it 6 to 8 feet underground. And get his copy of The Long Lost Friend and burn it. I mean, there's just like one teensy little problem though. Nelson Rehmeyer was 6'2" and powerfully built, even at 60 years old. Blymeyer knew this. The man was not going to hand over his spell book to someone who showed up at his door and asked nicely, let alone allow someone with scissors near his head for an unscheduled haircut. Blymeyer needed backup. And when you need backup for a stupid-ass plan, who do you go to? Well, Blymeyer went to stupid-ass teenagers. Enter John Curry, age 14, and Wilbert Hess, age 18. I mean, God help us, the frontal lobe is still a decade away from being fully formed. 14-year-old John Curry was, by his own account, trapped in an abusive household and believed himself hexed. He and Blymeyer had bonded over shared misfortune, which is exactly the wrong kind of community to build. Wilbert Hess was a farmer's son whose family had, starting around 1926, experienced catastrophic and relentless losses. Crops failed, cows stopped producing milk, chickens stopped laying. The family lost so much money, Wilbert's father had to sell off most of their land. By 1928, father and son were both driving trucks just to stay afloat. The Hess family also believed they were hexed. So when Blymeyer told them he had identified the source of all their hexes, same man, Nelson Rehmeyer, they signed on. And, fun fact, Wilbert also had something Blymeyer desperately needed. Access to a car. Because Rehmeyer's Hollow was hard to reach from York on foot, and neither Blymeyer nor Curry had a vehicle. Like, seriously? The decisive factor in this particular plot was a teenager having his dad's car? It's like picking a prom date at this point. Except the date is robbery, and I swear to God, if there's any backseat action, I'm going to start hurling hexes myself. The plan, such as it was, go to Rehmeyer's house, get the book, get the hair, leave. No need to do the murder on anyone. No fire, no absolute descent into chaos. But here's the thing about plans built on fear. They tend to fall apart the second reality shows up. So here we are, November 27th, 1928, the night before Thanksgiving. There is a full moon over York County. And no, that's not a spooky exaggeration for effect. I Googled it. Moon, full. It's cold, the way Pennsylvania hills are cold in late November. The kind of cold that makes the dark feel thicker, more deliberate, and kind of fucking rude, actually. Rehmeyer's Hollow is a narrow valley outside Stewartstown, named after the extended Rehmeyer family who'd been settling it since 1844. No streetlights, no neighbors within shouting distance, just trees, dirt, silence, and the kind of darkness that cloaks monsters in plain sight. The night before, November 26th, Blymeyer and Curry had already made a first visit. Just the two of them, basically a recon mission. They knocked on Rehmeyer's door. He answered, let them in, talked with them about powwow and folk medicine for a while, and when it got late, offered to let them sleep downstairs. They took him up on it, and while he slept, they searched the house for his copy of The Long-Lost Friend. They couldn't find it, and Blymeyer decided, I can't do this with only one other person. Rehmeyer is too big. They left in the morning, went back to York and got Hess. And on the night of November 27th, all three came back, armed with wooden sticks and 25 feet of rope. And I don't know, all I picture is kids playing pirates with their wooden stick swords. But this turns into a lot more than playing pretend. Rehmeyer let them in again. He had no reason not to. These were people from his community, speaking his language in every sense. Now, what happened next is drawn from trial confessions that were, as we'll get to, heavily edited. But here's the shape of it. They demanded Rehmeyer hand over the spell book and a lock of his hair. He refused. He was 6'2" and strong, and he fought back. Blymeyer choked him while Curry hit him over the head with a block of wood, 3 times, hard enough that blood poured from Rehmeyer's ear. Hess kicked and beat him. At some point, Rehmeyer reportedly offered to give them the book if they would stop, and when they loosened their grip, he threw out his wallet instead, which made Blymeyer even angrier. The whole thing couldn't have lasted more than a few minutes. And then Nelson Rehmeyer was dead on his kitchen floor. According to accounts from the proceedings, Blymeyer's immediate reaction was, thank God, the witch is dead. They ransacked the house, divided whatever cash they found, somewhere between 97 cents and $2.80, depending on which account you trust, which, again, in today's money is in the realm of $18 to $54. They never found the spell book. Panicked, they did what panicked people do, which always ends badly. They poured kerosene over Rehmeyer's body and set it on fire. Then they left, assuming the house would burn and take all the evidence with it. The house did not burn. Rehmeyer's body smoldered, parts of the floor scorched, but the wooden house, a dry, old 2-story clapboard farmhouse, the kind of thing that should go up like motherfucking tinder, did not catch. The clock above the stove stopped at 12:01. Rationally, fires fail for boring reasons. Oxygen, fuel load, inconsistent application of accelerant by killers who were also clearly not great at arson. But people looked at that half-burned farmhouse with a dead powwow doctor inside it and said, of course it didn't burn. Even in death, his power protects his home. 2 days later, a neighbor heard Rehmeyer's mule braying, hungry, unfed. The routine had stopped. The farm was waiting for someone who wasn't coming back. He went to check. He found what was left of Nelson Rehmeyer. The arrests came fast. Alice Rehmeyer, Nelson's estranged wife, told police about Blymeyer and Curry's visit the night before the murder. Authorities tracked the 3 men down, and all 3 confessed. Blymeyer seemed almost relieved. He told police that at the moment Rehmeyer died, he had felt the hex lift, felt the weight of decades of misfortune release, and he was at peace. You did just murder a man, but okay. The press went absolutely batshit crazy. Within days, journalists from major cities converged on York County. Papers nationwide ran headlines about the York hex slayers. The phrase voodoo murder was used by papers that apparently couldn't be bothered to distinguish between the two, which is a journalistic failure, but also deeply on brand for the times. York County was mortified. The community wanted this resolved and buried before the press could publish one more breathless story about backward Pennsylvania hicks consulting witches. That communal desire for speed had consequences. The York witch trial officially began January 9th, 1929. Judge Roy Sherwood presiding. Sherwood found this entire situation embarrassing and wanted it over fast. So he did something that in any modern courtroom would be grounds for a mistrial. He ordered all mention of witchcraft and hexes edited out of the confessions before they went into the record. All of it. 8 hours of confessions explaining exactly why 3 people did what they did, reduced to a version in which the official motive is robbery. The robbery haul between 97 cents and $2.80. That's it. That's the motive on paper. A jury of Blymeyer's peers, people who very likely believed in hexes themselves, who would have understood his logic, who might have even sympathized, was denied the real story and told to treat this like a conventional homicide. They did what the judge wanted. Blymeyer and Curry were convicted of first-degree murder and sentenced to life in prison. Hess was convicted of second-degree murder and sentenced to 10 to 20 years. Hess and Curry were paroled in 1934. Blymeyer petitioned repeatedly and was denied each time. He wasn't released until 1953. 23 years later. He was 56 years old when he walked out. None of the 3 men ever committed another crime. Curry became a talented artist. He died in 1962. Hess died in 1979. Blymeyer died in 1972. And just like that, the hex was replaced with something far more real. Prison walls, time, consequences that don't disappear with a ritual. Now, here's what gets lost in the true crime version of this story. The Hex Hollow murder did something to Powwow that the tradition has never fully recovered from. Before 1928, Braucherei was widespread and accepted, practiced quietly by Amish, Mennonites, and mainstream Pennsylvania Dutch families alike. People came to their local powwow doctor the way other people went to a GP. For warts, flu, serious illness, livestock problems, a vague sense of spiritual unease. It was the system. It wasn't fringe. After the trial, it was nationally associated with murder. Local officials and reformers pushed for scientific education to stamp out what they now called superstition. Practitioners went quiet, more private, more cautious. Because imagine trying to explain, I say prayers over burns and help stop bleeding, right after every newspaper in America ran a headline about hex murder in Pennsylvania. It's like trying to explain you're into astrology right after someone blamed Mercury retrograde for arson. The timing is just not working in your favor. But also, Mercury retrograde has hexed us all at some point. Scholars who studied powwow practice in the 2000s found only a single practitioner still using any physical spell book beyond the Bible. Most researchers trace that decline directly to this case and the public pressure to appear modern that followed it. The hex signs on Pennsylvania Dutch barns, those bright geometric designs you still see driving through Lancaster County, carry magical significance in the powwow tradition. They're still there. People just stopped talking about them. One man's desperate spiral erased generations of community healing practice from public life. That's not a footnote. That's the other body in this story. I've been sitting with this one for a while because the easy version, weird murder by a guy who believed in witches, keeps trying to flatten something that isn't flat. John Bleimeyer was probably a man with serious mental illness, possibly brought on by an actual illness that was never diagnosed or treated. From there, he had paranoid ideation, possible depression, chronic anxiety, in a time and place with no framework for those conditions other than the spiritual ones. His suffering was real. His dead children were real. His poverty was real. He just had the wrong explanation. And the system he turned to for help confirmed the wrong explanation, gave it a name, gave it a face, and charged him $30 for the privilege. Which brings us to Emma Knopp, the River Witch of Marietta, who identified a specific person as the source of Bleimeyer's lifelong misfortune, who gave him a specific roadmap for addressing that person, and was never charged with anything. She doesn't appear at trial. Her name surfaces in coverage and then vanishes. In a courtroom that acknowledged what actually happened, there would be questions about her role. But that was not the courtroom we were in. And then there's Nelson Rehmeyer, who was 60 years old, who was a farmer and a folk healer, who let neighbors into his home, who was beaten to death in his kitchen the night before Thanksgiving by people who had decided, based on an old woman's reading of a visual afterimage and his apparent resemblance to George Washington, that he was the reason their lives had fallen apart. He didn't hex anyone. There's no evidence he hexed anyone. His descendants have said consistently that he practiced the healing form of Braucherei. He was known as a good neighbor. He was murdered, and someone tried to burn him, and the house wouldn't burn, and the clock stopped at 12:01. The charred floorboards are still there. The clock is still stopped. The house is still standing. And I am genuinely disappointed that it's closed to the public and you can't go inside. The scariest part of this case isn't the hex. It isn't the fire that didn't take. It's that the belief became real enough to kill someone, and no single person stepped in to interrupt the spiral. Not the 20-odd witches Bleimeyer consulted over the years. Not Emma Knopp, who absolutely should have said something different. Not the people around Curry and Hess. Nobody said, hey, maybe let's not do a witchcraft home invasion tonight. And that silence, that absence of a single voice of interruption, that's not a 1928 problem. That's a human problem. We still have a lot of quiet surrounding fucked up circumstances. And that quiet is complicity. Also, side note, that book, The Long Lost Friend, is still in print, available on Amazon. It's like 4.6 stars. Kind of feel like maybe I should get myself a copy. You know, like make sure my crops are blessed. Definitely not to hex my enemies. And well, guys, that is it for this week's episode. A friendly reminder, if you're in the LA area this June, don't forget to get your HorrorCon tickets. It's the weekend of June 13th and 14th, and I will obviously be there shoving this podcast down everyone's throat until it's #1 on Apple and Spotify. I mean, shut up, a girl can dream. Also, if you want to help a girl with that dream, do the rate and review stuff, please. I'm like literally begging. It's pathetic, truly. And until next time, if life feels like it's personally targeting you, your car breaks down, your luck tanks, your cows, chickens, and corn stop producing, you're probably not hexed. But like also, if someone asks you for a lock of your hair, just like punch them in the dick and run. Just in case.